Thank you. Good morning, everybody, and you're very welcome to the meeting of the full Licensing Committee today, Thursday, December 10th. Before we start the meeting, I'd like to ask our clerk, Jill, please, to take us through housekeeping. Thank you, Jill.
Thank you, Chair. Please note that this meeting of the Licensing Committee is recorded by the Council for live broadcast and will be published on the Council website for a minimum of 6 months. In order to ensure the meeting is managed effectively, please could everyone present follow these ground rules for speaking. Only speak when invited to by the Chair. Always turn your video function on when invited to speak. Please state your name before you speak if you've not been introduced by name. Some people may need to dial into the meeting and will therefore not have the benefit of the visual. Mute your microphone when you are not talking. If you would like to speak on an item, please do so by using the raise your hand feature in the bar at the top of the Teams window. The messaging bar should not be used unless you are raising a point of order or providing the wording for a motion. Please remember that this panel is visible to all and subject to public information requests. If at any point you would like to speak again, please use the raise your hand function again. If a formal vote is required on any item, the Democratic Services Officer will call out each committee member's name. Please respond with "for" name. Finally, please ensure background noise is kept to a minimum and mobile phones and other devices are turned off or switched to silent for the duration of the meeting. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Jill. Now moving on to introductions, I'd like to ask each committee member please to introduce themselves, and I'll start, if I may, with my Vice Chair, Councillor Judy Bagwell, just to give your name and obviously your ward, etc. Thank you. Councillor Bagwell.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Councillor Bagwell from Hanworthy Ward, and I'm the Vice Chair of Licensing. It's great to see you all. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Sarah Anderson.
Good morning. My name is Councillor Sarah Anderson, and I represent Moordown Ward, and I'm here today.
Thank you. Councillor David Brown.
Good morning, I'm Councillor David Brown. I represent Bearwood and Merley Ward. I'm newly onto Licensing Committee, this first meeting as BCP Councillor, but I did do 12 years with you, Judy, didn't I, in Poole? So.
You certainly did, David, and I shall be introducing you specifically when we get to apologies. Yes, certainly you've got an old hand back. Thank you, David. It's nice to see you. Councillor Richard Burton.
Hello, Councillor Richard Burton, also Bearwood and Merley Ward, member of this committee.
Thank you. And Councillor Norman Decent. Oh, Councillor Decent, are you there?
Yes, good morning, Councillor Norman Decent, and my ward is Kinson and West Howe. Thank you.
Thank you. And Councillor Brian Dion.
Yeah, Councillor Brian Dion, Penhill.
Morning to you. Councillor Dwayne Farr.
Good morning, Councillor Dwayne Farr, Kinson Ward, member of the Licensing Committee. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Dwayne Farr, and thank you. I'm glad that we see you because I know you've had some difficulties with IT this morning, so it's good that you're with us. And Councillor Anne Filer.
Good morning, I'm Anne Filer. I represent Eastcliff and Springbourne in Bournemouth, and it's the first time I've been to a licensing meeting in 20 years on the council, so I'm really looking forward to this meeting.
You're very welcome, Anne, and thank you very much for attending today. Councillor David Flagg.
Good morning, Chairman. Good morning, members. Councillor David Flagg, member of the Licensing Committee and a representative of the Burton Grange Ward here in Christchurch.
Thank you, Councillor Flagg. And Councillor Andrew Hadley.
Andy Hadley, I'm a councillor for Poole Town Ward. This is my first Licensing Committee meeting, new to the area of licensing. Thank you.
You two are very welcome, Andy. And Councillor Toby Johnson, I know, has given his apologies. Councillor David Kelsey.
Yeah, Councillor Kelsey, Eastcliff and Springbourne Ward.
Thank you, David. And Councillor Lawrence Williams.
I'm Lawrence Williams and I represent Littledown and Iford.
Thank you very much. And now we move to our officers. We're rather honoured this morning because we have our monitoring officer attending to see what goes on in licensing. So firstly, very good morning to you, Susan. If you'd like to introduce yourself, please, Susan Zeiss.
Thank you very much, Councillor Butt. I'm Susan Zeiss, Director Law of Governance and Monitoring Officer. I think I've seen you all on TV before. I'm just observing today and I unfortunately have to leave the meeting at about 11:15, but thank you very much for having me.
You're extremely welcome. And Andrew Williams.
Good morning, Chair. I'm Andrew Williams. I'm Head of Safer Communities.
Thank you, Andrew. And Nananka Randle.
Good morning. I'm Nananka Randle. I'm the Licensing Manager for BCP Council.
Thank you, Nananka. And Sarah Rogers.
Good morning. My name is Sarah Rogers. I'm Senior Licensing Officer at BCP Council.
And our solicitor, Linda Cole.
Good morning, everyone. It's Linda Cole to advise the committee this morning.
And you're our senior solicitor, Linda. Thank you. And Jill Hollyoak.
Morning, Chair. Jill Hollyoak, Democratic Services. I'm clerking this morning.
Thank you very much. Right. Well, before we start, it's some goodbyes and some welcomes. And firstly, Councillor Beverley Dunlop went on to other climes, and we'd just like to say, I'd just like recorded, please, a vote of thanks to Beverley. She was always superb in our subcommittees and always very candid and helpful in this committee, and she served it well. So thank you very much, Councillor Dunlop, and goodbye to you. And the welcomes are for we welcome this morning Councillor Andy Hadley, who's a new member, and also Councillor Lawrence Williams. I know, Lawrence, you are deeply experienced with regard to licensing, and it's good to have you on board. Good to have you on board as well, Andrew. We do have also apologies from we also have David, of course, who we've introduced already. You're very welcome, David. Good to have you back with regard to your expertise. So having gone to substitute members, I need to go back to apologies. And before I do that, we have a substitute, and we have Bobby Dove, who has given her apologies, and the substitution there is Councillor Anne Filer. You're very welcome. We also have Councillor Farquhar, who has given his apologies. There is no substitute. And Councillor Toby Johnson, who's also given his apologies. There is no sub, but it may be that Councillor Johnson will be able to join us. He has a clashing commitment. So thank you with regard to substitute members. Nothing else there to add. We'll move on. So now we move on to declarations of interest. Your declarations of interest, members, are page 2 with regard to the flow chart. If there are any declarations of interest, can you please indicate by showing your hand? I can see no hands, so I will take that there are no declarations of interest to declare. So then we move on to the confirmation of minutes, which, if you have those on your screens, I will go through with you. The dates are, in fact, the dates of the 17th of September, which was the full licensing committee, and then the subcommittees, which were held on the 1st, the 16th and the 29th of September and the 13th of October. I hope there are no glaring gaps, omissions or errors. I haven't found anything, so unless anybody has got anything that they would like to raise, can we take those as read? If you don't agree, can you show your hand, please? If you do agree, then leave the hand as blank. OK, thank you. I will take those as read. Moving on then to agenda item 5, public issues. This is to receive any public questions, statements or petitions submitted in accordance with the Constitution, and which is available to view at the following link. Are there any public issues, please? Clerk, Jill, are there any public issues to raise?
No, Chair, there are no public questions submitted on items being considered at this meeting.
Thank you very much, Jill. So then moving on to the substantive, we move on to agenda item 6, which is the new BCP Council section establishment policy, and you'll be able to click on that on your virtual screen with regard to agenda item. Very pleased that our licensing manager, Nananka Randle, will be presenting this item. So thank you, Nananka.
Thank you, Chairman and members. So the item before you today is of the legislation with regard to sex establishments. The legislation it is the Local Government Miscellaneous Provisions Act 1982 as amended by Section 27 of the Policing and Crime Act 2009. By adopting that legislation, it allows us to publish a policy and then we can control and regulate the operation of sex establishments within our conurbation. There is a process that we have to go through to adopt that legislation, and that is within our options appraisal. The draft policy before you, particularly at sections 10 and 11, relates to the setting out of characteristics and the locality of characteristics within the area, and that allows the local authority to better regulate where we would allow such premises we see fit, based on what the areas are used for, the type of premises that are in those areas, schools, places of worship, residential areas, and also the characteristics. So are they used for family entertainment? So that's sort of set out. And in addition, Chapter 10 also asks members to consider the control of numbers such establishments within the area. We have a number of establishments already within the BCP area. They are licensed already, and we don't have any history of complaints of them. So the numbers that are stated within the draft policy are the numbers that currently exist within the area, and those are set out within Chapter 10. The final aspect of the report is also to consider the fees that BCP will collect for this function. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, so I think that the best way, members, with this is what we are asked to do is we will have all read the document, and I think it has been taken from the two sex establishment policies that we've had with Borough of Bournemouth and Borough of Poole preceding councils. So the finite information is fairly clear. The only conundrum we have today is, as Nananka's kindly pointed out, as to do we limit or don't we limit? And that's basically the bottom line, and that is pointed out in item 10. So I don't know, members, if you did want to go through the whole document, I'm more than happy to do that, but I think we might concentrate on item 10. If anybody's unhappy with that, if you'd like to indicate and advise me, please. Richard, thank you.
I just wanted to have the areas outlined in the wording. We have 3 establishments, I believe, in Bournemouth in the same area, and there's a description of that area and where that area is. Now I've looked on the map and sort of drew a line describing that area, and I actually sent a copy of it to you earlier.
Yes, thank you very much.
And one of the establishments seems to fall just outside of the description on the map. It's only by a small amount, but it's the way it faces. And therefore, I was wondering whether that description could be altered just to bring that establishment into that description.
Okay, thank you, Nananka. Would you like to advise us, please?
Yes, I mean, Councillor Burton did kindly send me an email with amended wording for that. The legislation does say that, we don't have to geographically define an area or even outline a boundary. We just have to give a general description so that generally you'd know that is the area that you're referring to. But I do think that the description that Councillor Burton provided is very useful. So his amendment to section 10.9 basically is so that it reads: the Horseshoe Common area is defined as the north side of Old Christchurch Road from opposite its junction with Yelverton Road, which is now Beale Place, in the west side of Lawn Park Road, and the south side of Old Christchurch Road from its junction to Yelverton Road, Beale Place, to the northwest side of Glenfern Road. So it just gives that slightly more defined characteristic there, which I think is very useful and helpful for anybody. So again, I'm more than happy to amend the policy with that wording if members so wish.
Thank you. It would have been, thank you, David. I've obviously missed the email where you advised me of that, because obviously the chair would need that advice because it helps the fluidity of the meeting if I know if there's to be amendment. So I'm sorry that I missed that notification. But yes, we will come back to you, I think. I think I would like to hear that amendment again, just to be absolutely clear. And if there's any Bournemouth councillors who obviously know this, previous Bournemouth councillors or councillors who live in Bournemouth that actually know this area very well, if there's any points you'd like to raise with regard to clarity and whether you're happy with that or not. It's not an area I know implicitly well. I'd be grateful. Thank you, David Kelsey. Thank you.
Yeah, Chair, I think it's a perfectly acceptable amendment to be made. It literally is a matter of feet, but if we are going to do these policies correctly, I think Richard's amendment is perfectly satisfactory. I think Nananka's description was absolutely correct in what she was saying. So yeah, more than happy to go along with that amendment.
Thank you very much, David, and I'm very grateful to you, Richard, for finding out that extra yard. It always matters. So with that amendment in mind then, can we just have the wording again, please, so that I have it clearly, and we will, when we go to our decision, we will make sure that at 10.9 we have Richard's amendment as amended. Thank you.
Would you like me to read it out again, yeah?
I would, please, Nananka, thank you.
Okay, yeah. So 10.9, the Horseshoe Common area is defined as, and then it goes to a bullet point, the north side of Old Christchurch Road from opposite, which is the new word, its junction with Yelverton Road, and then brackets, Beale Place, to the west side of Lawn Park Road. And next bullet point, the south side of Old Christchurch Road from its junction with Yelverton Road, in brackets, Beale Place, to the northwest, which is the additional word, side of Glenfern Road.
Thank you, Nananka. Susan, you'd like to speak.
I'm so sorry, Chairman. I know I'm just observing, but I did notice that in paragraph 10.10, there's a reference to the borough, and I wondered if that was just a hangover from the previous policies and should now relate to the council area.
You're very kind, Susan. We do have quite a few typos in this at the minute. We've got it where it's the borough, and we've got it where it's BCP Council, and we've got a big mix in there, and it should be BCP Council Licensing Authority. So we will go down and tweak that. So thank you for referencing that. But there are a few shakes at the moment still to iron out. Thank you. It's very helpful.
I had identified that as well. So
yes,
Nananka's
got her little copy where she's got all her little tweaks. So we are onto that. Thank you very much indeed. So members, thank you very much for drawing that to our attention, Richard. That makes absolute sense. And thank you, David, for clarifying. So we have that amendment, and I'll addend to it at the end of this item when we have our decisions and to take forward. So then, if we're all content with that, if we could move then to 10.1. I think it's quite clear what we have in front of us. One is with regards to leaving as the first one is with regards to limitations, and the second one we have an and or. Let's just find it. Of course, it disappears the minute I try and talk about it. License premises. Nananka, I'd be grateful if you could take us through because I can't find access to it. Thank you.
Okay, so 10.1 is just a generic introduction, basically saying that we acknowledge that the concentration of licensed premises in the area could lead to potential for fear of crime and disorder. So we are aware of the necessity to balance the needs of the community against the amenities of the local area. And then section 10.2 basically then confirms the characteristics or the character of the location. So it goes, well, so again, we'd have to tweak the wording because it does say, well, the BCP Licensing Authority has not imposed a limit because it's an and/or situation at the moment within this draft. Number of premises that may be licensed in any area, and whilst treating each application on its merits, the BCP Licensing Authority will, with each application, consider the characteristics of the locality and consider whether to grant the application. Would it be appropriate having regard to the proximity to and its residential premises which are sensitive because of they're frequented by children and families, shops used by or directed at children, families or children, premises sensitive for religious purposes, and it goes through that list. Just reading up and rechecking the legislation, I think we do need to just be careful. I think we have to be careful with the wording. So although this says characteristics in 10.2, it actually should say the character of the locality, because characteristics is actually chapter 11. So it's just a little tweak there, but I would say that would make it more appropriate, because although we accept that there is a crossover between the two, they are very different aspects for the policy.
Thank you, Nananka. So we have the first one is we're talking about the character of the location and applying all the various caveats as to whether it might be suitable to have an establishment or not. And the second one is with regard to limits. So I think I will open the floor to members to tacit some opinion as to your thoughts on this. So members, if you'd like to indicate it, if you'd like to speak, please. Oh, I have Andrew Hadley. Thank you, Andrew.
Sorry, it's Andy, Chair.
I'm so sorry, Andy. I beg your pardon. Councillor Andy Hadley. Thank you.
So I was slightly confused because paragraphs 10, 1, 2 and 4 are also in section 11. So we're being asked to choose between sort of two halves in section 10, but actually much of the first half is actually also in section 11. It repeats with the same wording. So I don't know whether we need, whether we actually need the choice, or whether it's the second half of section 10 and then section 11, or whether Nananka could help us with that.
If you'd like some clarification. Yeah,
I think yes. Again, the 11 should be more relating to the characteristics. So I would say that the first 11.1 is sort of really taken very similar to 10.1 in its repetition, again, just to see whether what members decide. But 11 really should start at 11.2. That as a general rule, the locality whose characteristics fall predominantly in one or more of the following categories will generally be considered inappropriate for the grant or renewal of a sex establishment. And again, that's more about the generic use of the area. It's talking about the pier approach, the seafront areas. You would list sort of the keys as their family areas, really, that you wouldn't want this type of establishment really to set up. So it's very similar, and again, the legislation is quite clear that there is a crossover between character and characteristic. So the character of the local of the area could be predominantly residential with some family orientated commercial, shops and there'd be schools and maybe a hospital or playgroup areas. That's the character, but the characteristics is the generic use of the broader stroke of the area. So like it says, peer approach, potentially the triangle is sort of changing, but we're just saying that they are changing over time. We're not trying to be static in the policy. We're recognizing that these areas can be quite fluid. I don't know if that helps at all.
Did that help, Andy?
Did it?
Well, it does, but I guess in being asked to choose, it's a complicated nuance, isn't it, between character and characteristics? But if the wording of the characteristics in section 11 covers the first half, then do we actually have a choice to make, or do we remove that from section 10 and cover the detail of the locations that we currently understand have sex establishments in them? So, does that make the choice for us, is I guess the question I'll ask.
I suppose you could merge, you've got that list in 10.2 that is not reflected in 11, in chapter 11. So you might want to move that down to chapter 11 and keep chapter 10 rather than location of licensed. Well, you could keep that as location and number of licensed premises if you wish to have a defined number that you will allow to be licensed within that defined area. And then you can have the characteristics and character of the relevant locality as stated in 11, but including the bullet points from 10.2.
Right, well, this is becoming a little complicated, isn't it, with regard to the report we have in front of us. I'm not entirely certain if anybody else has some slight confusion as to where we are. Andy, you've raised a very good point, but I think we need some much better clarity, if we could, Nananka, with exactly where we are with this. We're talking of character and we're talking of characteristics. Character pertaining to 10 and characteristics pertaining to 11 for relevant reasons. But I think we need to understand why it is that we would have a list in, and now we're moving the list to 11 and taking it from 10. I certainly don't have complete clarity as to what we have in front of us now. Thank you.
Perhaps Sarah can jump in because she's got some guidance in front of her that she was discussing with me earlier.
Thank you, Nananka. That would be very helpful. Sarah Rogers, would you like to?
Hi, yeah, we were looking at this earlier just before the meeting to get the clarity ourselves, and I'm just going by a textbook that we use, and the character or characteristics of the locality where the premises are situated are instrumental in determining whether or not the grant of a licence will be appropriate. So if it is considered inappropriate to have sex establishments in a locality, can be refused, and it can be refused under the appropriate number. And then it goes on to give some, it's a long, I'm trying to summarise it. I think Nananka,
you said earlier about the characteristics on that document.
Nananka, I thought you did explain it, but as what Nananka said previously, really. So you've got the characteristics of the locality, but in addition to that, there are characters of the location of the licensed premises within it's difficult to
an area. So basically, is it in the middle of a residential area? Is it near a church? Is it near a school? Or it could be in the middle of nowhere, but it's a family area, so near the pier perhaps, where there may be more commercial, but it's the actual use of the area rather than the zoning of the area for purposes. So I think it's the purpose and the use are sort of slightly separated out.
Yeah, but with the policy is written with the wording within the Act.
Yeah. Anne, would you like to come in, please?
Yeah, well, I'm slightly more confused than I was before, and the question is actually about this. First a question, how often are these licenses renewed? Is it annually?
Yes, yearly. They're annual. We get them for up to a year.
Thank you, because what it says in 11 is that an area doesn't stay static. What was a school or what was a church or what was a piece of open playground quite quickly can become a densely residential area with a building of some flats or a church becoming redundant or a playgroup moving in or a playgroup moving out. So I think if it's reviewed annually, that would cover that, wouldn't it? But would the applicant take kindly if he or she had been there for many years, if a building is built next door and they're an established, well-run sex establishment, and suddenly you said, well, we've built flats next door, so you can't carry on. How would that sit?
Each application and renewal is based on its own merits. So I would give you an example. Exactly what you've talked about there is a sex shop in the Triangle, and we're aware that the Triangle locality and the characteristic of the locality has changed from being sort of quite a nighttime drinking sort of establishment to more of a family mixed use area as time has gone by. However, that venue or that establishment has never generated any complaint. So based on its own merits, which is what we have to do for everyone, the policy is the policy, but we don't have to stick rigidly to it. We have to, make a balanced decision. So we're on renewal, whereas we recognise that area is changing, and with natural wastage, if that venue ever left, we would probably change the number down to 0 based on the characteristic and the use of that area now. But as it stands at the moment, there's no reason to reject that a renewal application, obviously, unless people start putting in objections, and we would have to consider it then. But at the moment, there's not been any history of complaints, so there'd be no reason to reject the application.
Thank you, Nananka. Linda, please. Linda Cole.
Thank you, Chair. Sorry, I was just checking the mute. I was just wondering if a better way forward that might be not so confusing with you is to maybe to consider what you all feel about approving the numbers, whether you're going to have a limit in the policy or not in the policy. And I wonder if you discuss that issue first. We could then, because if you went with the numbers, sticking with numbers that are already existent in the Bournemouth area and the area was already, then we could then look at combining the part of 10.1, 10.2 in with 11, because there is certainly duplication, and it might be clearer to amend it as one section. But I just wonder if it might be, rather than start at 10.1, 10.2, I wonder if it might be easier for you to consider 10.5, 10.6. Go, make your considerations about your numbers and whether you're going to agree to continue to stick with what's already there, or whether you want to change it down to 0, and then we could then look at the whole locality and dealing with matters individually and on its merit, you know, as one paragraph. I don't know if you think that might be clearer in Nananka as well.
Yes, thank you, Linda, for your advice to the chair. Members, are you content with that? Would you like that as a way forward, please? Because there is utter confusion at the minute. I'm disappointed that this hasn't been discussed before and that we haven't had the advice, but these things happen. So are members content that we look at 10.5 through to 10 with regard to limit, and then once we've decided whether we want to do that or not, that we can then go back and refresh on Andy's point with regard to the duplication. Is everybody happy with that? If you're not, please indicate. I'm seeing Anne nodding. Okay, that's good. Okay, then, so members, we'll go back then to 10.5. You've all got everything in front of you, and this is basically with regard to limit as to what we do have. So at the moment we have 3, and we have 2 in Holdenhurst Road, and then we have 1 at the Triangle. So the way forward is, do we wish to continue to keep this limit to 3, or do we not? So members, if I have any indications, please, if you'd like to speak. Okay, I have nothing. I have Councillor Kelsey. Thank you, David.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. It's just for clarification. You say we have 3. Are you referring purely to sex shops?
Yes, I'm looking at the sex shops. Just 10.5 and 10.6.
Ashley Road in Poole?
It's not noted in there.
There isn't one in Ashley Road in Poole.
No,
but there was.
No. There was. Yes, it's gone now. Yes,
okay,
yes, it went
fine.
some time ago. Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Kelsey. Councillor Hadley?
I thought Councillor Brown showed before me, actually.
Councillor Hadley, thank you. Councillor Hadley, thank you.
Sorry, I thought Councillor Brown showed before me.
I'm inviting you to speak, Councillor Hadley. Thank you.
Okay, sorry, thank you. Yeah, just in terms of and I can't remember. I did have a session with Nananka and Linda. Part of the reason I suppose sex shops are closing down is because they're moving online, and I wasn't clear. I couldn't find in the policy anything about sex places selling sex toys or whatever online within our area, and whether that falls under our licensing commitments to regulate or not. Particularly, I guess, in terms of if they started to allow people to turn up and collect the things, it becomes a sex shop. So I just wanted a bit of clarity on that in terms of control of warehousing type premises or online premises.
That's a good question. It's a very good question. I don't think we have jurisdiction, but we can certainly get you an answer. Before we do, David, my apologies. If you'd like to come in now, David Brown, thank you.
Yes, thanks, Chair. Just on this, the whole sort of number and limits, and Councillor Kelsey's right. You know, they did used to be on Ashley Road in Parkstone, a sex shop, which, as far as I'm aware, ran without any sort of issues or any sort of problems or concerns particularly. And I think, you know, we have had in the past other sex establishments. I think we had a sexual entertainment venue near Poole Quay at some time. But, you know, the market forces have sort of changed things, and they've come and gone. But as far as I'm aware, we haven't particularly had sort of any difficulties or issues with them. And that's my just thought on limiting the numbers. In some ways, the sort of market and things moving online is limiting the numbers for us. And I'm a little bit wary of us actually specifying it and doing it ourselves and saying, well, no, we only want that maximum limit and only in that place, because do we believe in market forces or not, regardless of the type of industry and business this is? You know, do we believe in the sort of market forces? If there's suddenly, you know, this is a policy for the long term. You know, in 10, 20, 30 years, new communities will be built and developed in Poole. The demands and requirements of the population of Poole may be different, and there may be people who think, well, why do I have to travel all the way over to Bournemouth to go to visit a premises I want to go to? You know, there's a demand in Poole. So I'm just a little bit wary of actually putting limits and numbers on things for which are going to be a long-term limit and number and could cause problems in the future. And that may mean that people set up a sex shop but work around the rules, because I know there are other sort of retail premises which avoid being called a sex shop because they have clothing and other products, so that it's not a significant proportion as the sex shop bit. So, you know, I'm just wary that people may try and set up a sex shop which just avoids the regulations and then just operate anyway to get around it if there is a limit. So I'd rather we didn't have a limit personally, and then we have a little bit more input and control to it. That's just my thoughts on it.
Thank you very much, David. That's extremely useful. I've now have David Lawrence Williams. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. Chair, I'm very keen to know whether there's any limit on ownership. For instance, if we have 3 in one area, it's quite possible that they could all be owned by one person, and that may not be a good thing to do. Is there a limit on ownership, or is this just free market trading?
Okay, thank you very much for that, Lawrence. We will get your question answered at the end of the session. We now have Anne. Would you like to come in, please? Anne Filer?
Yeah. Sorry, takes a while to unclick.
That's okay.
I'm surprised that you say that most of these 3, with the 10.8 says there are 3 sexual entertainment venues in the Horseshoe Common area. I'm sure that's right. But 10.10 says that we don't consider any other area in the borough suitable. But the ward that David, Kelsey and I represent has definitely got one in Wyndham Road. There's no question. David's shaking his head. It maybe had gone. It's advertised as a spa, but according to my local complainers, it's not a spa. It's a couples venue, and it's certainly not a spa. David knows better. How, I'm not too sure, but anyway. So I think there are others around, and also the question, I think it was either David Brown or Lawrence Williams asked about just skirting the law. I believe that it's a question of content in these shops. So you can have a shop selling rather unusual underwear in the window, blatantly displayed, which is right near a bus stop where children are going to school. But if they don't sell anything hardcore inside, there's actually nothing terribly wrong. I think I'm right. And I imagine it's a very fine line. I think this is more for David's question as well, because there are shops which sell underwear, Marks and Spencer's not least, which are certainly not in any way sleazy. So I think that would be really hard. It's a really hard thing. If someone wants to open up a shop with a bit of stuff that's not actually considered wrong, but some other people would consider offensive, I would imagine there's not much that we can do about that.
Yes, thank you, Anne. There is a definitive list as to what actually deems the stock to be a sex shop or not, as to videos, etc., etc. There is an actually defined list which actually tells us that. So our officers can be sure that they can refer to that to ensure that they are letting a licence as appropriate. Councillor Kelsey, would you like to come in now, please?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. It was just a bit of clarification, really. The premises that my trusted colleague, Councillor Filer, is referring to is in Wyndham Road. It's actually not licensed either for alcohol or as an SEV. It falls under an exemption as it is classified as a health spa. The activities that our local residents are referring to are something which I've already spoken with Miss Rogers about this morning, and they will be looked into as a matter of course to be done. It does seem they may be flirting with the law somewhat. So that will be that. With regards to Councillor Lawrence Williams' shop, the 2 sex shops that are in Holdenhurst Road are both owned by the same person, and that same person happens to be the biggest owner of sex shops in the whole of the UK. In the 13 years that I've worked with them, never yet had a complaint. He's never failed to do anything correctly, and in fact, he's a model citizen as far as the rules and regulations are concerned. So I don't feel that one owner being in charge of several premises. It's a bit like saying Tesco's own too many supermarkets, really. Thank you, Chair.
That's a very good point. Thank you. Are there any other members who'd like to speak? No? Okay, then. So we have 2 questions then. Councillor Andy Hadley raised the issue of online licences in our jurisdiction. It's a very, very good point. And Councillor Lawrence Williams did raise the limit on ownership. And although Councillor Kelsey has given a very good breakdown of how this can happen and why. I think that's still a good question, and we should ask if there is a limit on ownership. Clearly there isn't, because David explained that, but just for some clarity. So may I ask Nananka or Sarah, could you answer those questions, please?
Do you want me to know?
Yes, please, Sarah.
Okay, so
thank you, Sarah, if you'd like to answer.
That's okay. So under the definition of a sex shop, it's any premises, vehicle, vessel, or store that consists to a significant degree. So that answers the other question as well about Anne Summers, for example, where they do have sex articles, sex toys. They do have 18 DVDs, etc. But their lingerie outweighs the element of the adult material. So they do not need a sex shop license because they're not selling the sex articles and sex toys to a significant degree. That's the test. You may recall, Councillor Kelsey, in the triangle we had that premises that was selling lots of videos, family videos, but a section of it was pornographic videos. So eventually they closed down, but we could never ever prove that they were doing it to a significant degree, so they fell under the scope. So sex shops can only be licensed if they're a premises, a vehicle, whatever, sorry, a vessel. So the online sales don't come under this, and you're only a sex shop if you're selling the sexual aids or toys, whatever, to a significant degree.
Right, so it's not the, thank you for that, Sarah. So it's not the quantity you sell, it's the stock and the ratio.
Yeah, there's case law. So obviously this has been tested numerous times, and there is case law that you can refer to. I was just having a quick, so I can give you a brief sort of outline. So in order for premises stocking sex aids and or pornographic material to constitute a sex shop, they must, under paragraph 4.1, be used for a business when consist to a significant degree of selling such material. What constitutes a significant degree is a matter of some uncertainty, since the expression has been subject of different interpretations in the High Court. And the two cases mentioned are Watford Borough Council v Private Alternative Birth Control Information and Education Centres, where the defendants were prosecuted for operating an unlicensed sex shop, but the High Court overturned the Crown Court, finding on evidence that the prosecution had failed to establish that the proportion of sex articles on sale was to an amount to a significant degree. So we do have case law, and we just have to take every case individually and look at it.
Yep, addition being it is down to proportion and ratio as to how much of anything. So if you have 500 DVDs and 20 of them are pornographic, then that ratio would not be deemed to be suitable with regard to sex shop license. It would just be, I suppose, a video store that sold a few naughties, or DVD store.
Yeah,
so
they also like the aspects of the business judged by reference to value or profit rather than the amount and space used. So it's the profit being made as well.
Oh, so it does. So it is proportion and it's profit.
Yeah, basically.
Okay. All right. Thank you. I hope that answers your question, Councillor Hadley. Are you content? Yes. Okay. And we had a question from Councillor Williams, which is with regard to limit on ownership. Could we have advice, please?
Well, as Councillor Kelsey said, we have two sex shop establishments on Holdenhurst Road, which are owned by the same company, and there is no limit on the number of sex shops that a company can own.
Yes. Okay. Are you content, Councillor Williams?
Do the rules apply, for instance, to massage parlours and other establishments, or is this a carte blanche across the whole sector?
It depends on what those establishments are offering. So if they're offering, if they're selling sex items, toys, etc., that to a significant degree, then we'd be looking at the sex shop. If they were offering services that fell into live sex shows or nudity, then you're falling into the sexual entertainment realms. But if they're massaging and that's all they're doing, then they wouldn't fall into this legislation, no.
So the question with regard to, is there a limit as to how many premises you can own? There is not. There is nothing in law that states that. So we're clear on that.
I'm aware of.
Linda's shaking her head. So I take it that's there is no limit. Shake head. Yes. No. Linda. Yes. Okay.
No, there's no limit.
There's no limit. Thank you for that. Yeah. Right. Okay. So we've established that. Okay. So at the moment we have heard from Councillor Brown, who is saying that he's a little wary of we're keeping this limit or imposing this limit within our new draft strategy, because of course this is a completely new. Are there any comments as to Councillor Brown's thoughts on not having a limit and perhaps allowing it to be under all the other tests, and we apply those tests and we don't have a limit? Councillor Bagwell.
Thank you, Chair. I totally agree with Councillor Brown. It's I don't see as we have the right to define how many sex establishments can set up or whatever. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you very much for that, Councillor Bagwell. So another member who is concerned with regard to limitations. Is there a consensus in any way at the moment? Obviously, we can take a vote on it, but is there anybody who is particularly concerned about there being a limit, or are members of the mind that we should be able to police this, so to speak, with all the applications we can have in train as to the tests that we can apply to make sure that we do have a safe licenses in place? Are there any comments as to that? Is anybody dying in a ditch over this? Or Councillor Kelsey, thank you.
No, Chairman, I'm actually quite fine with removing the limit number because, you know, the areas are changing. The Bournemouth Town Centre, for example, at the moment has the 3 SEV venues, and it may well be that in time somebody wants to open one in Poole, which would be, if it was in the right position and in the right area and there were no objections to it, then I would see no reason on that not being able to happen. Yep. It may well then be that as the town centre in Bournemouth is getting more and more popularised with residential areas now, that we may at some time want to say, actually, we need to go down to 2 in Bournemouth. So I think removing that limit is actually, and along with what Councillor David Brown has said, I think it's an actually sensible idea to do. It's a very rapidly changing conurbation that we have now. We're stretching out in all sorts of areas and shapes and form, and I think we need to have that flexibility now to be able to do what people want. We're in a very dynamic sort of employment situation, business situation. And it may well be that somebody wants to come back to Ashley Road. And as Councillor Brown said, why should they travel all the way to Bournemouth when they can go to Ashley Road and get exactly the same thing? So I'm actually very supportive of what Councillor Brown and Councillor Bagley have both said in removing the limits. I no longer see that they're necessary.
Thank you very much, David. That's an extremely good steer. Councillor Dwayne Farr, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, just echoing what's been said, basically, that good not to have a limit. It's just the locations to consider in future, which I'm sure it already is considered. Someone who's new to this area licensing. Obviously schools and religious buildings wouldn't be appropriate to have them nearby, and I suppose that would be an as and when situation if that arose. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, Councillor Farr. Councillor Richard Burton.
I mean, I would. I don't like it, particularly with the discussion we've just had about ownership, because you could end up with one establishment or one owner owning our limit, which actually then stifles any competition. You get you get a monopoly. It's basically one establishment spread in 3 venues. I'm sort of uncomfortable about nailing down too carefully locations, because, as we said, we get regeneration, we get movement, we get establishments who close down, and you get venues which become available, which may be more suitable. So you might, by putting in a location, stop movement to a more suitable area, just because we're drawing a line at the moment where the locations are.
Yes, so very good points, Richard, indeed. And I think the last point about the monopoly is certainly very interesting, because if we had one person, then if they weren't upholding the license properly, we could be in a world of pain. So that's an extremely good point. Do I have any other members who'd like to speak, please? I've got LC. No, that's not a member. Okay, so the next person then, Andy Williams, would you like to come in, please? Did you indicate to speak?
No, I didn't, Chair.
Oh, you didn't, right. Okay, so we have Linda Cole. Thank you, Linda. Linda, thank you. You're indicating to speak.
Thank you. I did so. Sorry, Chair.
No worries.
Really, it's just a comment really that just might be a little bit helpful in response really to what Councillor Burton was saying. The location that's in the draft report is just an historic location that was formed around the venues that were already in situ when this legislation came to us a good number of years ago now, and the view at the time was that that was the appropriate place, but they didn't want the committee at the time didn't want it to go any further. The difficulty you have if you were going down a different route is a sexual entertainment venue license. It is a commodity, it's property, and it's got a value. So not to allow those type of licenses in a particular area could, the council would be at risk of challenge for that decision. So really, when the locations were created those number of years ago, it really was around what was there at the time. But yes, I think you're all quite right. There has been a lot of change in Bournemouth Town Centre since all those years ago, and as lots of you have already said, it is a fluctuating area at the moment. There's going to be a lot of change, a lot of build, but that was all. I just thought it'd be helpful to give you a little bit of background as why those locations were chosen at the time.
Thank you for that, Linda. Sarah Rogers, you indicated to speak.
Yes, thank you, Chair. It was basically what Linda's touched on. What I was going to highlight, when we were talking about removing the numbers, I just wanted to highlight that did include 10.8, the sexual entertainment venues that we've got a limit to. So you were talking just about sex shops. I just wanted to highlight, if you did decide to remove those numbers, you also need to take into account the sexual entertainment venues.
Yes, we're talking about any sexual establishment, really.
Okay.
Thank you for that reminder, though. So, members, if I have anybody else to speak, what we have on the table at the minute is nobody has indicated that they are vehemently wishing to keep the limit. And in fact, a lot of members have spoken saying that they're quite cool with it. And in equity, oh, Councillor Filer, would you like to come in for a last comment? I'm sorry, I didn't see you indicating.
I would,
Thank you.
as a result of what Sarah's just said. I'm
yes.
quite happy with the shops. I think that would be market forces, but I wouldn't like any part of the whole conurbation to become a little Soho as a result of us being too liberal on the numbers, that you had one concentration of sexual entertainment establishments in any part of the borough. It could be anywhere, couldn't it? So can we have some clarity? Do we have any ability to define our more latitude to the numbers and exclude the entertainment section?
Well, what we have there is we have a list of finite considerations which we apply if we're not going to limit, and the finite considerations are, they're all listed there with regard to what we have in mind when we are actually considering whether we would let a license or not. And they're stated as residential premises which are sensitive, premises sensitive for religious purposes, etc., etc. Now we'd look at those, there's a whole long list. We'd look at those in the cold light of day, and as Councillor Kelsey's already alluded to, and Councillor Burton, we're ever changing, we're moving and morphing. So perhaps the square now in Bournemouth is becoming more family orientated with regard to all the events that are on there, and things might move. But we can't provide for something we don't know about, but we do need to stay open. So we would need to apply that list each time, Anne, very strictly and very vehemently, not allowing anything to run away. I think there's no fear of all of a sudden people can't demand a license. They have to come within the criterion of the application. And if they don't fulfill that, then they don't get a license. So I think there's a network there, there's a safety net there for us. I don't know if that helps with your question. Thank you. Andy, were you indicating? Thank you. Andy Hadley?
Yes, thank you. Yeah, I think building on what Councillor Fowler said, really, that there's something perhaps about concentration and whether we could just have something that said, you know, within a ward no more than 2 or 3 to stop getting into a whole area becoming concentrated or perhaps consideration of being blighted. But it does come back to the character and characteristics, and I've been to the dictionary to try and understand the difference. I think, you know, given the difficulty we had and the officers had, it may be better just to think character and characteristics in the same paragraph rather than trying to split them out. But it is about defining, you know, what are the things that we're concerned about and that our residents would be concerned about. But that may include the number in any one location, wherever it is in the conurbation.
Yes, it's a very good point. I do like your take on character and characteristics, certainly conjoined. We got a suggestion then that is it possible to limit on one and not the other, or to give an idea of number. I don't know whether this is possible as to whether we can have a hybrid, but the question at the moment is no more than 2 or 3. So Linda, you've indicated perhaps you could answer that, assist us. If not, I'll go back to Sarah on Nananka. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, that was why I just raised my hand.
Thank you, Linda.
You can put a limit on the SEV venues, which are your lap dancing, pole dancing clubs, which concentrated at the moment in the Horseshoe Common area, and you could have no limit on the sex shops if that's what you choose to do. It's up to you in your policy what you want to, you know, put in there, but certainly you can have a different decision on both types of establishment.
And conversely, you could have a limit on sex shops, but not on the sexual entertainment venue. It works both ways, I take it.
Yes, of course. Yeah.
Okay. So I think the question, I think from Andy and from Anne, was it the sex shops that you were concerned about limiting, Anne, or the sexual entertainment venues?
It was the entertainment
venues. So it was the sex shops. Was there a mind amongst members that they would be content that we wouldn't worry too much with regard to number, but that to limit the sexual entertainment? Are there any thoughts on that? So we have a hybrid, or do we think that we can provide for the risk with regard to our definitive list of our tests we have in front of us before we let a license? Thank you, Andy.
Put your hand up.
Andy Hadley?
Yes, thank you. I guess it comes back to the characteristics of an area. Do we want to have a whole series of sex shops any more than a whole series of entertainment venues? So I would have thought that a limit of a fairly small number in any one area should apply to both equally, would be my view, but not where that is.
Okay, so we're back into another discussion now then, having an indication that limit could be removed. We're back into now hybrid and limiting to a certain amount. Councillor Kelsey and then Councillor Burton, thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I think we would be on very dodgy ground if we stick to a limit of what we have. The reason for that is the limits, as Mrs. Cole and Mrs. Rogers have said before, the limits that are in the policy at the moment are those that were imposed under the former Bournemouth Council, because we were only dealing with the Bournemouth area and we had no right to dictate what was going on in either Poole or Christchurch at that time. What we are saying now, if we are not going to remove those limits, is that Bournemouth is still going to be the only place in the whole of this conurbation that could have sex shops or sexual entertainment venue, which as a Bournemouth person, I think at the time was correct. At this time, now we are a much larger conurbation, I think it's totally wrong. Yep. And I think if we as a licensing authority and as a professional licensing board, I am sure that we are capable of looking at any application for any area and determining the rights and reasonings for that particular application, whether the area they want to have it is the correct area at the time. We have to remember that every application is dealt with on its merits. If somebody wants to put an application out in the middle of an industrial site, we will then have to say, is that the right area to have that industrial site? Rather, should we have it there, or should we stick it in the middle of Bournemouth, where the other three are already? If Wiggles, for example, from Bournemouth wanted to move to get away from the other two, would we be refusing that if they wanted to stick it out in Tower Park? Probably not, because Tower Park is not such a highly residential area. I'm not saying it should go there, but I'm just saying we need to have the flexibility within our provenance and within this policy to be able to put places where A, the businesses think they could be successful, and where, more importantly, it is going to be less of a hindrance on our residents. At the end of the day, all residents have the opportunity to object to any licence. The only thing they cannot object to is on moral grounds. The same as members of this board must remember, we cannot judge sexual entertainment venues, be it shops or venues, on moral grounds. It is purely on their ability to uphold their licence conditions, whether they be in the right area or not. So I personally would be rather happier if we took away the limits. At the moment, if we keep the limits, then we are limited them to only being in the Bournemouth area, which I think is totally wrong. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much, Dave, because you make a very good point with regard to equity and parity there. Councillor Burton. Thank you, Richard.
Yeah, I very much agree with Councillor Kelsey just said. He's touching on the sort of thing I was thinking about as well. Areas do change. The areas where the sexual entertainment establishments are at the moment have changed significantly in the last few years. Places there that were banks, I imagine, will be turned into flats and houses quite soon. The whole area of that Bournemouth and these other areas of Bournemouth that are becoming derelict and might have better venues available for them to move to. So actually saying you have to stay there, we're condemning an area to remain the same as it is. And not allowing improvement in drift and regeneration.
Thank you, Councillor Burton. I'll bring in Councillor Bagwell now because her button's not working. So if that's okay, Councillor Bagwell, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I totally agree. Councillor Kelsey's wording was absolutely brilliant. I have every faith in our officers and us as a committee to do the job properly and to do each venue, each establishment, anything that comes to us is on its own merit, and we then decide. The list is endless on the reasons and whatever. We have all the character, we have all the characteristics written down, and we go by that. So I really don't see as we have a problem. To be honest, I believe we should be stretching the area out, and everybody has a right to go and try to get the license and whatever, and then run their premises as they wish. I don't think we're a dictatorship. I'm hoping we're not, and we should rightly so be doing as Councillor Kelsey said. It was amazing, brilliant. Thank you, Councillor Kelsey.
You're muted, Chairman.
Thank you. I'm so sorry. Thank you very much. Councillor Hadley, I'll bring you in because I noticed you put a message on the chat bar and you feel that you would like to clarify a point you made. Thank you.
I'm sorry. I think
no, that's fine. That's fine. I understand.
Councillor Kelsey, I think misunderstood what I said. So what I meant was in any area not to have a large number. So to have some sort of limit per ward was what I said. I think previously that you don't end up with a strong concentration in one area. So 2 or 3 in an area. Otherwise, potentially people might feel that their area has suddenly become somewhere they don't want to be.
Okay, thank you for that. So you're saying that limit per ward rather than allowing market forces and our endless list of checks to deal with that. But I think I have your point. Councillor Brown, you've been extremely patient. Would you like to speak now? And then Councillor Anderson, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, actually, I completely agree with Councillor Kelsey. Actually, what he said, as a licensing committee, we have the ability to sort of judge these applications on their merits. And also, I'm a bit concerned, if we put a limit, regardless of whether it's sex shops or the sexual entertainment venues, I don't think we should have a limit on any. That we're sort of influencing competition, and those existing operators, I think, would probably be quite keen on keeping the limit because they've got their own sort of monopoly market then. And if we believe in competition and market forces, we're going to prevent a new operator coming in. And actually, you may make the existing operators a bit lazy in terms of what they do, what they provide for customers, how they comply with licensing policies, those sorts of things, and you may have a more astute operator wanting to get in and do things better that actually we prevent because we've got an artificial sort of arbitrary limit on it. So yeah, I think I don't believe in a limit on any of the sort of specific categories. I think actually Councillor Hadley brings up an interesting point about limiting it in a particular area, and I tend to agree with that. Actually, you don't want 6, 7, 8, operating in one street, because it can cause sort of the cumulative impact. Effectively, could cause issues. But I'm not quite sure how we would do that in the policy. And let's just remember, this is a draft policy that we're agreeing to go out to public consultation in January. So it's not the final version. If the public come back, if operators come back, if representative bodies in the area come back and say, actually, we do think BCP should have a limit for these very good reasons, then we need to take that into consideration. So at the moment, we're agreeing what's going to go out in the draft policy for consultation. So I'd rather our draft policy goes out there without the limits, and if we get representations about limits, or about limits in particular areas, or limits of types, then we take that into consideration.
Thank you, David. That's extremely helpful, and I couldn't agree more. Competition always improves standards, doesn't it? Always. Thank you very much for that. I have Councillor Anderson. Sarah, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Happy to support the removal of the limits in line with all the other councillors that have said. Also agree with Councillor Brown. See how it goes when it goes out into public consultation. And then we'll take it from there.
Yes, you're quite right. Yes, very sound advice. Thank you. Councillor David Flagg, if you'd like to speak now, thank you. I don't know if I've kept you waiting. If I have, my apologies. Thank you, Councillor Flagg.
Thank you, Chair. I think there are other officers are raised before me. However,
yes, I'll bring the officers in when I'm ready. Thank you, Councillor Flagg.
Thank you. Yes, I don't foresee a great deal of applications coming forward for Christchurch, but I do agree with members with regards to limiting establishments. I don't think that's the correct thing to do. We shouldn't stifle free enterprise. I think the most important thing for me as a representative from Christchurch is that we must have that robust list that we follow with regards to any applications that come forward. And I'll leave it at that, Chairman. Thank you.
Indeed, thank you. Thank you for advising us about your particular locale, but obviously we're all considering BCP as a whole as BCP councillors, but it's good to have that inside knowledge. Councillor Flagg, thank you very much for that. Do I have any other members who are indicating to speak? I don't. There's no points of clarity anybody would like to raise. Okay, thank you. I've now got, I've indicated Linda and then Nananka. Thank you. You're going to give us some advice, I hope, on those points. Thank you, Linda.
Thank you, Chair. Well, all I was going to suggest really in response to what Councillor Hadley and Councillor Brown did raise a couple of speakers ago is that there's no reason in the list that you've got in 10.2 at the moment, if you're going to use that list as your consideration when any applications are being considered, that you could add something, or we could add something into that list about consideration of the number of premises already in the particular area. So that might just cover that concern that some councillors have.
Sorry, would you say that again, Linda? Which item are we talking about now, 11 or 10?
So I'm talking about the concerns that Councillor Hadley has and Councillor Brown also alluded to.
Yeah,
about
let's just be clear. Okay, thank you, Linda. Just to be clear on that for the members, and that was with regards to a suggestion of a certain limit within each ward. This is what you're talking about. Okay, thank you.
Yeah. So,
and your solution is?
Well, I don't know if it's a solution. It's just a consideration that part of your list of what you would consider when any application, when you're determining any application, whether the list in 10.2 stays in 10 or goes into 11, because we've got to sort that out, don't we, anyway? But included in your list when you've got residential premises, shops, religious areas, cultural facilities, public leisure facilities, in that list, you could also have a comment that you'd also consider the number of venues or of a similar type that are already in that location or that area.
Yeah.
So that may be, it could be something then that could safeguard too many in one particular area.
I have you. That makes absolute sense. So to state that some wording, but mindful of the number within each ward, so that there wasn't any accumulation impact there. So that could
in there.
Yeah, I mean, obviously the wording we would lead to good sales with regard to it being legally correct, but something like that. So what the risk we're trying to avoid is that we don't end up with 20 sex establishments perhaps in Creekmoor, although there's plenty of room for them. But whether that's a joke. So it would be having that balance. Yes, were members happy with putting in an extra line there, an extra item there around the wording of mindful of the number within each ward when we're considering the points which we have to apply. I have got David. Would you like to come back, dear? David Brown, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I'll just put a quick comment in the chat, but I think actually that's a good solution that's been suggested there, actually, that in that list in 10.2, obviously it's the list of the things that we would, as a licensing authority, would consider as a committee. And it does list, the last bullet point there is about other sex establishments. And I think if we just added to that with a bullet point about the number of similar establishments in the locality and their potential cumulative impact, it just gives us the right as a committee and as an authority to consider that with any application. So if there's a fourth or fifth or sixth application area where there's already some, then we've got within our armoury to say, actually, we refuse that application on the basis that we think actually the cumulative impact of adding a fifth similar venue in that location is going to have a cumulative impact, which is not what we want. So yeah, I think just having the additional bullet point there does add to our armoury in terms of considering these applications.
Thank you for that, David. That makes absolute sense. I'm just a bit nervous there about the blanding about of cumulative impact. I mean, we don't have a policy, do we? So how does that pan out with regard to if we're going to use that as a statement within one of our policies? Could I be advised, please? We don't have cumulative impact areas, do we? So we're talking about cumulative impact in generic terms. How does that square with adding it into other sexual establishments so that we can be ward wary?
Are you happy for me to speak, Chair?
Yes, I'd like your advice, please, Linda.
Thank you. I think we do need to be just a little bit careful with the wording, and maybe we could find some other words that mean the same thing. Community of impact is well, it's common to the Licensing Act and it is all about crime and disorder and public nuisance. So I just think we will think of possibly a different word so we don't sort of muddle that word up, because the cumulative impact we're talking about in this scenario won't be the same cumulative impact that we would be talking about if we were talking to licensed premises in Bournemouth Town Centre or Poole Town Centre, Ashley Cross, the usual places where it's of a concern. So but yes, it's just something that would be the same words. Well, I'll have a think about it. We'll come up with a bullet point there.
Yes, I think we've got the meaning behind what we'd all like to see there, but I'm just wary of wording, that was all. But I thought, David, you make a very good point. Thank you. David Kelsey, thank you, David.
No, Chairman, Councillor Brown is thinking along exactly the same lines as I was, and he said exactly what I was going to say with regards to cumulative impact. And Mrs. Cole has also come back and said exactly what I was going to say about having those particular words. So I'd be quite happy to leave the wording of that with our wonderful legal team and licensing to get the exact same meaning, but in a slightly different wording.
Thank you very much, Councillor Kelsey. So it seems that we have consensus then, having gone through. I'm just looking to see if anybody else wants to speak. Have I missed anybody? No, right. Nananka, did you want to add something before I carry on? Your hand up. Where are you, Nananka? Okay, thank you. Right, so we seem to have consensus then, or we do have consensus with regard to...
Nananka was speaking, but she's on mute.
Oh, Nananka, you're on mute.
I'm so sorry. missed
You
that.
disappeared. You disappeared. Come back to us.
Sorry.
Oh, thank you,
I'm
Nananka.
back. I'm back in the room.
Yeah, you've got the floor. Thank you.
Thank you. Just going back to what Councillor Brown was saying about the consultation, and it might be something to think about when we go out for public consultation. We can actually ask specific questions of the policy. So perhaps, you know, when we're at that stage, the chair and the vice chair may wish to sort of think about what the actual questions we want to ask, with particular reference to the you know, do people want us to set a number? Do they want us to look at, you know, the numbers in wards or generally? It was just, I know Councillor Brown did mention it, so I just thought it is something. I just wanted to clarify that we can consider that when we do the consultation.
Okay, fine. Thank you very much for that, Nananka. So what we have then in front of us is we have an agreement, a consensus after our discussions that we're not going to limit, subject to the consideration around the last bullet point, where other sex establishments, so we don't get ward overload. And there's going to be some careful wording there, which is going to be created. I've seen Nananka smiling, so that's fine. So with that said, then I don't know if you want to take a formal vote. I'm happy to, if you so wish. Would the members like to take a formal vote on the fact that we are not going to limit, or are we just content to agree? I'm seeing lots of nodded heads. Okay, I think we are just content to agree. We are very much like this within this committee. We discuss and have consensus, so that's fine. So that having been said, then we have that in train. Now we are now in the position where we've removed the limit. So what should the wording now look like, please, Nananka, within this report where we're taking bits out and putting bits in? I think it'd be useful for all members to understand that. Thank you.
Okay, I think, well, what we would do is remove or completely delete section 10.5 to 10.10.
Okay. Members, are you, if you'd like to carry on, members? Yes, so we're looking at or licensing committee decide to limit the numbers. So we would remove 10.5 to 10.10. That would come out. Thank you very much for that, Nananka. That's useful. So we're left with that wording in 10, which is go back to Andy's character and characteristics. So that said, and we've dealt with that, how will that now impact on 11? Thank you.
Well, like I say, 11.1 actually replicates 10.4. So we could just tag on 11.2 and 11.3 onto the end of 10.4 and just have a chapter 10 and no 11. Or obviously renumber it all so there is an 11, because otherwise, you know, that'd be a bit silly. But yeah,
right. Okay. Well,
yeah.
Okay. Thank you. Well, I've just totally lost my public report, so I'm just going to bring that back up. Okay. Thank you. So you're going to have to remind me, because I lost my public report and I didn't hear a word of what you said, Nananka. Forgive me for the last item. Could you just repeat? We're going to remove 10.5 to 10.10, and then we were going to amend a certain section of 11. Could you remind me, please?
Yeah, we would literally delete section 11.1 and then move section 11.2 and 11.3 onto the end of 10.4, so they become 10.5 and 10.6, and we would then, you know, not have that. The character of the relevant locality would be removed, and then it would go on from 10 to new numbering for the rest of the document.
Well, I think I have you on that, actually. I think I understood that. That's fine, Nananka. Well done. Is anybody unclear on that? If anybody still needs a clarification, please just pop your hand up, because we need to get this right. Good. No hand showing. So with that in train, then I will just reiterate, we are not going to limit number. Therefore, 10.5 to 10.10 is going to be removed, as is 11.1, and 11.2 and 11.3 will become 10.5 and 10.6, and then 12 will become 11, etc., on layout. Is everybody content with that? Any hand showing? Good. That is excellent. Thank you very much for that. So we've done 10 and 11. So are there any other points that members would like to discuss with regard to this report? Wait a minute, David. I'll read you 2 seconds. Actually covers some of the numbers, right? I've got comment here from David Brown. 11.3 actually covers some of the numbers discussion we had. Sorry, David, would you like to clarify that? And I've got hands all over the place now, so that's fine. So, David, if you wanted to come in and clarify that, and then Councillor Burton and Councillor Hadley, thank you.
Yeah, just actually where we were discussing about adding a bullet point onto that list earlier about the numbers in the area and the, for want of a better phrase, cumulative impact. That actually 11.3 in the draft policy does talk about that anyway. That actually the licensing authority will take account of the potential impact of the licensed activity on crime and disorder, and where there's already one or more sex establishment premises in the locality, the cumulative impact of an additional licensed sex establishment premises. So that sort of does the job of what we were talking about, the additional point.
Okay,
it might be the sort of you know,
it's a little windy, but I'm sure we can cut it down.
Might be useful to have an extra bullet point just as belt and braces, really. So yeah.
Yes, thank you. That's perfectly clear. Thank you, Councillor Burton, and then Councillor Hadley. Richard.
Yep, thank you, Chair. I'm just clicking the microphone.
That's all right. Yeah, thank you.
I'm just checking because you're talking about moving on. Are we talking about moving on from the whole of the report?
No. I was just saying, if there's anything else anybody wanted to say about that particular item.
Right. No, I've got something from further down, so I'll leave that to later.
Fine. Yes, we were then going to move on to the rest of the substantive report. Thank you, David. Thank you for that. And Andy Hadley. Andy, thank you.
Sorry. Yes, I was also going to talk about the substantive report.
Good, that's fine then. No, I was just finishing washing up on that particular item. So with David's point raised with regard to the wording, 11.3 might be useful, so we can perhaps make that more concise. Linda, you're indicating, did you want to speak?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I'd already made a comment on my own draft about that word of cumulative impact in there, because I think it's still worth changing that to just take us completely away from the Licensing Act community impact meaning. And also the main comment about the impact on crime and disorder, that comes from another statute. We've always got to consider that in any decision you make. So I think it is good to keep that paragraph in, but we'll just try and find a different word, which we'll run past you before we send it out to consultation, obviously. But we will do that.
Thank you, Linda. Yes, it's very important, obviously, to keep it very clear as to what we're meaning and not to have any cross-references. Thank you very much for that. That's very helpful. So if we are content then with items 10 and 11, if we move on then to the rest of the report, would you like me to scroll through, or are there any members who would like to just take me to an area and we can discuss that? Richard, shall I come back to you with regard to you raising your point on the substantive? Would that be helpful?
Yeah, I mean, this is just something which is probably out of date now, but to stop it becoming totally out of date before it is out of date, it comes with the goods available in sex establishments, the films and DVDs mentioned.
Could you take us to the relevant number?
It's around 40, 41, 43, 44, quite a long way down the document.
It certainly is. All right, let's just see if we can find it. 40. Okay, just get the right point so we all understand what you're taking us to. I don't have a 40. Would you give us a page number, please, Richard? I know they're over.
Yeah, it's a bit. It's unfortunately not. Let me have a.
It's unfortunate. Well, we've got a page 100 or page 20. Is it before or after that?
Let's have a look. There's only two numbers there. I'm seeing 24, maybe a 24, 25 or 26, something like that.
Okay.
It's only a minor thing. It's just describing goods available in sexual establishments, about films having a British Board of Film Classification.
Yes.
Yeah, because it mentions DVDs and videos, and then somebody at some point is obviously tried to update it to bring in Blu-rays and computer games, memory sticks. I mean, it's one of these areas which is probably disappearing now because everything's done online, as it were. But just to keep it up to date, maybe take out the DVD and videos and put digital media, whether physical or virtual.
Yeah, I quite like that phrase, Richard. That covers absolutely everything, doesn't it? We don't need then to have a list. Your thoughts on that, Nananka? That would be appropriate.
Yes,
You're nodding.
yes.
Yes. Yes.
Sorry.
Thank you, Richard.
I found the section of it, so it's in the goods available in sex establishments bit in one of the appendices.
Right.
So I'll if you could, well, I'm sure Jill's made a note of the wording, and I'll amend that accordingly.
Yes, obviously coming from a man who knows his stuff in the technology arena. Thank you very much. So we'll use that generic.
I would say only the technology arena in this forum.
Thank you very much, Richard. So we'll use that generic term then. Grateful to you for that. Councillor Hadley. Did you indicate, because you said you wanted to speak to the substance?
Yeah, it was a very simple thing. In the actual the paper itself, so the introductory paper, it talks about an option appraisal and then gives us one option, which is kind of Hobson's choice. So I'm not sure it is an options appraisal. I think it is just a recommendation or a route, because it says this will go through consultation and go to full council. It's not actually an options appraisal because there's not more than one option to choose from.
Okay.
Yeah, so that is the wording on the templates for BCP Council, so that's why it says that. Sorry.
Well, that's okay. That can be amended. I mean, clearly, if things are no longer in plural, then we can amend that each time. Thank you for raising that point. So if we go back then to the agenda item in full, the policy, are there any other pages or any other bits and bobs that members would like to raise, or are we so content that the draft policy go out in this format with all the amendments that we have discussed and had consensus and agreement? If anybody has any last minute points they'd like to raise for clarity, don't be shy. Richard, Councillor Richard Burton, thank you.
Sorry, I'm going on a bit here today, aren't I? It's just a question not about the policy, but what happens in the meantime, because this is a draft policy, and it's going to go to full council, I believe, before it becomes implemented. Can I ask what happens if anybody wants to do anything, say move a venue or move a license before the draft policy gets ratified?
Well, I can ask Nananka to advise, but we will carry on as we are at the moment until such times as we adopt this policy. And at the moment, it's on it. The applications are sent in and they're dealt with by the licensing officers, so that won't change.
The preceding authority policies for Bournemouth and Poole still stand. So that that we would just follow what we would have to do with regard to the preceding authorities policies, and there's no policy in Christchurch, so we would just have to wing it, I think.
Right.
At the moment, just to refresh, Rich, at the moment, as Councillor Kelsey advised us, we do have a limit in Bournemouth. We don't in Poole, and we don't have a policy for Christchurch, so that stays until such times as we can adopt this and take it to council.
Yeah. It was totally practical. I was thinking about it. If somebody owned a license to one of the establishments, needed to move it, died, the establishment was sold in the near future before this came through, would we have something in place that would suffice?
Yes, we are provided for. We are as is until such time as we change. So that is dealt with. Thank you. Linda, you wanted to come in?
Thank you, Chair. Really, it was only a comment really on what Councillor Burton has just raised. I think this once this goes out to consultation, this is your base new policy, isn't it? I mean, so I think it's at what stage that application might come in the interim period. So when we were doing the section of statement of licensing policy, once that policy had been discussed among you and then it went out to consultation and then it came back, it was sort of it was a developing policy. So I think any decisions or any applications that you may get before this comes properly into force, the right thing to do would be to consider everything in the whole, what the policy is currently that you're working with, which would be the Bournemouth and Poole policies. Christchurch haven't got one, but you would also have to take some account into what's in your thoughts and how you're developing going forward. So I think it would just be every application individually dealt with on the merits, and you could look at both policies really. Of course, it also depends where how far we are. This could go out to consultation, and people that the consultees might completely not agree with anything that you've said here. They might have a completely different view. But so I think it all depends on just what stage we are in that process to having that final policy. Thank you. I don't know if that helps or not, if I've just confused people.
I'm sorry, I was mute. Councillor Kelsey, you indicated to speak. I'm sorry.
I was just about to tell you you were muted, Chairman.
Yes, thank you.
No, yeah, with regards to what Mrs. Cole's just said, she's absolutely right. And although this is not really anything to do with it, we have a similar precedence in planning, where if there is an upcoming planning, area coming up, we are allowed to take that into some form of consideration when dealing with applications that come in before that is fully implemented. So it just depends. We can give it a certain weight to our thoughts. But as Mrs. Cole has said, and as everyone else has said, every application that we deal with as a licensing board is purely dealt on its own merits. And as long as we all as members remember that, we should never have a problem with dealing with any application that comes in front of us, because every application is different, situated in a different area, and needs to be dealt with entirely on that particular application. I think we're all experienced now. There's certainly a lot of experience on this licensing board now to be able to do that. So I'd be quite happy with that. And I'd like to assure Councillor Burton that would be how it would be dealt with. But I think he raised a very, very valid point about that, because it will confuse some people.
Thank you, Councillor Burton.
I'd just like to say that thank you very much. And I mean, my thoughts were being totally practical here, because I know we've just had a lockdown. I know a lot of venues have been closed due to rules. I imagine when the venues start to open again, that there may be movement, sales, businesses taken over due to financial reasons, and there may be some work to be done here. And I just felt we needed a clear understanding where we're at.
Thank you very much. Right. Well, I'm going to draw this discussion to a close if members are happy with that. And my last comment is we've heard that we can be mindful with regard to emerging policy, but we mustn't be so rigid that we put too much weight to an emerging policy, because we could find ourselves in a difficult situation with regard to appeal. So it is just a case of being sensible and looking at everything and considering everything, and then making a decision. I think that's well understood. So are members happy that we draw this to a close? I think we have the recommendations in train, and I will go back to the recommendations, I hope, if I can find them in this lovely bouncy. I'm just finding the recommendations for this. Nananka, do you have the recommendations in front of you that I'm going to ask members? Members are being asked to adopt the policy subject to all the amendments with regard, and to allow the consultation process. Am I right? I haven't got it in front of me, so I'm rather winging blind here. Thank you.
That's correct, yes. So members agree that we adopt the legislation for BCP area. We agree the wording of the draft document as discussed. And then the final item was just to agree the fees as presented in the updated appendix that was provided.
Okay, so actually, thank you for that, Nananka. Perhaps we just best popped to the fee lists. Do you have the fee lists in front of you, ladies and gentlemen? They are the amended ones, which are more than the ones we had before, which is a bit Chinese, but it's agenda item 6, appendix 3, and you should have acceptance of a license and administration. You should have £72 in the first line. We don't intend to go through all these. These have obviously been set, so we are not in profit. We're not allowed to make a profit, and we're not allowed to make any monies that come back with regard to enforcement. So that having set in mind, the officers have obviously sat down and worked this out with finance as to what's fair and what's applicable, and been checked by legal. So I think the facts sit in front of us well. If there's anything with regard to any other issue, happy to hear. Thank you. Councillor Kelsey.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. No, I think the increase in the fees is applicable, and it's where it's required. I think they are quite correct, and happy to support those new fee lines. It does, of course, with COVID and everything, there's been a lot more work for the licensing teams to do with regards to checking premises and things. And I think this will go towards helping that to be done on a more regular basis with everything. So I'm more than happy with that. Chairman, if I may, can I just ask one question with regards to where the consultation is going to? I have had requests from particularly my local neighbourhood forum group, which is the Springbourne Forum and Springbourne community groups, if they can be involved in the consultation. I don't think their names were on the list, but we can get those to them. I just wondered whether that would be possible to do so, please.
I'm absolutely certain it can be, Councillor Kelsey. Thank you for raising that. And there was an anomaly there for myself as well, that I felt it was going to Bournemouth magistrates. It should go to Poole magistrates as well. I noticed that they're not on the list, unless there's any reason why they shouldn't go to Poole magistrates, which Nananka is going to tell me there is. Thank you, Nananka.
I expect Linda would also say it is Bournemouth and Poole magistrates, although they're called Bournemouth. It is actually based in the Poole magistrates court, because Bournemouth hasn't got the magistrates court anymore. So it's just what it's called.
Okay, so can we put Bournemouth and Poole then? Would that be, I think, more helpful for the public who'd understand it's going to both courts? Thank you for that. I'm grateful.
I think it's actually, I mean, it's basically Dorset Magistrates Court. There is no such thing as Bournemouth Magistrates Court anymore. It's gone. It's been turned into a school, isn't it? So
okay, well, I
Dorset
think
Magistrates Court sit in Poole.
Thank you. My point is that for the public to understand it, Dorset brackets Bournemouth and covering Bournemouth and Poole area or some such, okay, because Dorset is seen as Dorset Council. It's just for clarity for the public so they understand. If there's any, sorry, David.
Don't forget Christchurch.
Indeed. If there's any on this list, it is quite a long list, but if there's anybody who's got a reason that they'd like anybody else involved, then please can you indicate to Nananka after the meeting, and I'm sure she'll be able to advise you whether that's appropriate or not, but the list can be as open as we want, I'm certain. So subject to that and the acceptance of fees, so can we accept the fees and the lists of the consultation or the consultees? So I now have the recommendation. Members agreed to the adoption of the legislation, agree a draft policy ready for public consultation to begin in January. We've agreed all the amendments that sit within that, and we also agree the proposed fees. So do I have, if anybody is in disagreement? No, I've got lots of hands. Oh, I've got no hands. That's good. That means everybody agrees. Thank you very much, members. Just like to ask, we're now 20 to 12. Everybody content we continue with the next item? Nobody needing a break? That's absolutely fine then. So we'll go on to item 7. I'm not seeing anybody indicating. Oh, thank you, Councillor Flagg. We shall continue. So now we move to item number 7, which is the scrap metal dealer policy, which actually I found really interesting reading. I never thought I would. I must be sad. So we've got the BCP Council scrap metal dealer policy, scrap metal dealer policy. Again, this is now a generic policy. We don't have to have one, but we're choosing to. So I'll hand over to Nananka to present the report. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Butt. So the Scrap Metal Dealers Act allows local authorities to regulate and issue licences to certain types of scrap metal collectors, dealers, sites, metal motor salvage operators as well. The legislation came in 2013. And at the time, it was in response to quite a lot of theft of metal from places like church roofs and railway sidings. So it was a real problem. And you know, local authorities responded accordingly and made sure that the relevant licenses were put into place for the relevant premises and collectors. BCP. When we've come together now, we need to have one way of responding to these applications. Currently there are 3 fees, 3 sets of fees, and no policy. So it felt that this was a good time to bring in a policy which just literally sets out how we as the licensing authority will deal with applications, what we expect of applicants, and how we process them, and also to agree a single set of fees for the BCP conurbation. There will be a slight impact on the budget because previously collectors had to have a licence in each council area that they operated in. So if they had to collect, if they worked throughout Dorset, every local authority that they covered, they have to have an individual license for that area. So for BCP now, they won't have to have 3 licenses. They will only have 1 collector's license for the whole air conurbation, which is much easier for them, and it makes sense. So really, it's quite a straightforward policy. It really just does detail how we will deal with the applications.
Yes, it's thank you very much for that, Nananka. The application form is quite lengthy. It's very lengthy, in fact. But having read it through, I couldn't find any issues in there that where it wasn't clear. Of course, if members have found any glitches, I'd be grateful. But members, sorry, Nananka.
Sorry, it is a statutory form, so the application is set out in the statute as to what we have to collect when
Yes,
people are
indeed,
applying.
Yeah, the form isn't though. It is statutory, but the form you have created the form to comply with that statute. Yes, thank you for that. Members, open to you then, open to the floor. Are there any comments with regard to this? I think it's fairly clear in its application, but if there's any comments, Councillor Lawrence Williams. Lawrence, thank you.
Thanks. It's a question, really.
Yes, of course.
Does this cover precious scrap metal or just regular scrap metal? And if it is covering precious scrap metal, should we not include it?
No, it doesn't. It doesn't cover gold and silver, and it doesn't cover any alloy that has more than 2%. So it is just actual trash. It's all the stuff we don't want to wear around our fingers and around our necks. Okay, so it doesn't cover precious metals. Thank you. Are there any other questions? Councillor Kelsey, thank you, David.
Yeah, thank you. You read that section the same as I did, Chairman.
I did.
Yeah, thank you for this report.
I clearly missed it.
Yeah, thank you for the report, Nananka. Obviously, in Bournemouth, we never had this because we never had anyone here collecting it, and it was never a problem. I'm not sure about previously in Poole or Christchurch. It was a very good and interesting read. I didn't realise there were so many regulations that went into this, and it was obviously a very difficult policy to put together. So I appreciate the work that's gone into this. I've read through it several times now, and I cannot see anything that at this time I feel we need to amend on it. And again, going through the fees section afterwards, again, I think they're appropriate for what we need to do at this time. And I'd be quite happy to suggest that we move this one along with the previous one, Chairman.
Thank you very much for that, Councillor Kelsey. I couldn't agree more. I do like to find some errors and omissions, but I couldn't find any. So yes, an excellent report, Nananka. Thank you very much indeed. So with that said, unless members have any other comments, I will put the recommendation forward. And the recommendation is that members consider the draft policy in Appendix 1 and amend as necessary. We've not found it necessary. And then we will put forward the final version for ratification by the Council. I'll ask for a date as to when that is going, when I'm complete. And members consider and agree the single set of proposed fees made under the Scrap Dealers Act 2013, the BCP Council area set out in Appendix 2. So are we content, members? If anybody has any further issues? No, we are content. So Nananka, subject to you giving us a date perhaps as to when that might go to Council, will it go to the next Council or the Council after?
I believe it's the 23rd of February is the next full Council.
I do remember you saying that, yes. Okay, so members, that will come to I'll present that on our behalf at the Council on the 23rd of February. Okay, so watch this space.
Chair, I'm so sorry to interrupt. It's just to alert you, there is actually a council meeting on the 5th of January, so it could go to that one if you wish.
Oh, right. Okay. I thought that was still pending. I've got pending on my calendar. That's not quite agreed.
Okay, we'll check.
Ish. Yep. So either or, that's fine. Thank you very much. So thank you very much for that, members. Moving on then to the forward plan. You'll all have the forward plan in front of you. This takes us up to the 4th of March. We are dealing with items 1 and 2 today. They're dealt with. We did have a bit of a hiatus on our taxi and private hire policies, but they're now going to be coming to us. We think we've managed to agree a date, and that date will hopefully be, Jill will be able to send out this information, an extra meeting on February the 4th next year, so that we can consider all our taxi policies in the cold light of day. We're going to invite some of the taxi trade or those that want to come along and just really have a questions and answer session to try and assist them to bring them along on the journey, because we do need to move this on. There has been a lot of feedback, substantive responses. I know that Richard had a member, one of his residents most concerned, and he was able to advise them accordingly, and I'm sure we've all had the same. So we want to offer the opportunity for the taxi trade to come forward, talk to us, and let's get it straight. So we're going to have a one-stop shop meeting on the February the 4th next year, and that'll be a 10 o'clock meeting in the morning. Hope everybody's happy with that. That covers all those. We've got harmonisation of licensing fees. I've just got a TBC to agree licensing fees for BCP, sorry, not BBC, BCP Council. So Nananka, did you want to advise us and enlarge on that, please?
Yes, so that is the harmonisation of all the other fees, particular reference to taxis, pleasure boat licensing, water boatmen. There's a variety of different things that we issue, and that is proposed to go to the licensing committee on that 4th of February as well. Okay. I wondered if we were going to dovetail both of those. That makes sense, because once the taxi policies are agreed, then we'll have more weight as to how that impacts on the fees. Thank you very much for that. And then moving on to the draft gambling policy, which I know we're going to, is this the one we're going to be a bit behind with, but we've got permissions to be behind with it, or not? Nananka, if you could advise the committee, please. Yes, so gambling policies are set nationally. The timescale is set nationally by the Gambling Commission, and a couple of the preceding authorities didn't have one set last year, or 2019. So the next actual published date for the gambling policy should be April 2022. So on discussion with the Gambling Commission, very similar to what we were actually discussing earlier, the proposal is to have a draft policy in train for April 2021 moving forward, so that there is a draft policy that we can refer to should we need to. That will go out to public consultation, and then it would then come into play in line with the national timetable for April 2022. Thank you very much. Is everybody clear on that? Does anybody want any clarification? I think that was quite straightforward. Okay, so we'll be looking then at our next meeting to extend our forward plan and for the other works that we have ahead of us. So we'll be looking to see those things coming forward. If anybody's got any items that they ever want on the forward plan, then please just advise Jill and myself, and we can look at those with my Vice Chair, Councillor Bagwell. Thank you. So that agreed then, we now move on to Chairman's updates very, very quickly. At the last meeting of Council, the schedule of meetings was delegated to myself to get in train. Now, this wasn't for any power trip. This was merely because we need to get these items on the calendar, and we have to set about 26 a year. We also have to make provision for these for emergency cover over the festive period. So we've now we sent out an invitation for people to comment on whether Wednesday was a better day. There were quite a few members having difficulties with Tuesdays, and also to set ourselves a day that we actually meet, because planning meets on a Thursday, council on a Tuesday, to have a set day so the public were aware that Wednesdays was very much subcommittee day. Now, we can't go directly to Wednesdays for every meeting because there's a clash with Cabinet, and of course we would demur to the major committee, but this is because we can't stream more than one meeting at a minute. So we are setting the meetings for the next 2 years. So we have a definitive list, which I know Jill has been working extremely hard on. They are mainly Wednesdays, but if not a Wednesday, because basically there's a clash with Cabinet, then it will be a Thursday. We also know that, of course, Thursdays is Councillor Kelsey's as chairman of planning, that's his day, but we don't think we've got any clashes in those 2 years, because we, as planning now has gone to a monthly meeting. So that said, the main meeting day will be a Wednesday. We will demur to a Thursday to cover for Cabinet, and the list which Jill has very kindly been working on has been agreed, because it was delegated to me to do so, to get it on the calendar quickly out in the public realm, and that will be sent out to everybody after the meeting. Jill, are you happy with that?
Yes, that's fine, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thank you. I don't know how you did it, Jill, but it was a huge piece of work to go through and work out and dodge all the other meetings. But at least we now know that Wednesdays is our substantive day. So moving on to the second item, which is a proposal of a trial to use and identify second reserve. We found we're very much sucking it and seeing as we move into this new authority, and we've achieved quite a lot in licensing, and we set up a formulaic arrangement where we would have a rota system, and we would have 3 members for a subcommittee, and we would have 1 reserve. Because of the rota system, it's often people can't be available because it's so long ahead, and we're finding our reserves aren't available. So it was thought in the first interim to trial having 2 reserves, so that if one falls out, we've always got the second, because right up until the beginning of the meeting, we can pop the reserve in. It's not like a substitution where you have to have a time. But it does just cover, because the work of the subcommittee is so time consuming and so costly, we never wanted to be in a position where we could not begin the meeting. So I'm just suggesting, would the committee be agreeable to trialling until May of next year, that we see the second reserve, so we have 2 reserves in train. So 2 reserves would turn up. If we didn't need a reserve, fine. If we did need a reserve, then obviously the reserves could discuss amongst themselves as to who would like to stay. Are we content with this? Does this seem a sensible way forward? Is there anybody who has any dissent or? Lovely. Okay, then. So that's agreed then. So if you could make a note, please, Jill, that the committee has kindly agreed that we will trial 2 reserves until May of next year. And then moving on to the other point, with regard to the rota system at the minute, we've had that in train for 18 months. It's been like the curate's egg, good in parts, but next year, at the next licensing, the full night licensing committee, not the special one, but the next one, I've asked Richard Jones to bring a paper forward on some options as to how we might rediscuss about how we set members for attendance of subcommittees, because the rota system has fallen down somewhat. So Richard's going to come up with some ideas there, and we will then discuss whether the trialling of the reserves has also been a success, and if it has been, we can adopt that, and hopefully we can find a way forward, because the rota system is falling down a bit. We're finding out that people, it's booked so far ahead, people have got something else to do, and then we've got our clerks having to phone round to get people in. But as I said, we'll have an options document and we can look at that, and we could take everybody's advice, and hopefully we can find a way forward. Anne, are you indicating, dear? Did you want to speak?
I am, yes. I'm wondering, I've never been trained in licensing, and I wonder if it would help with this situation if more non-normal licensing people did have the appropriate training, so that you could ask people to step in, as I have today. It's really interesting, and it's something I would be happy to do. I guess other people would too. So could you perhaps think of that, of having people who would be eligible to sit in on subcommittees, should the need arise?
Yeah, thank you, Linda. Just before you speak, I mean, anybody, it's not a case of eligibility. Even a cabinet member could train, because they might not always be a cabinet member. So any training sessions that I would arrange with our vice chair would be open to every single member, and that's an extremely good point, Anne, and I'm glad you've raised it, because we do need to put some training in train next year. We do need to have something. We haven't gathered together. I know it's difficult with COVID, but we do need to ascertain what training we need, and I'm hoping to ask James Burton. I know a lot of you will know James Burton. He's worked with us before. He's extremely good. Again, I'll discuss that with Jill to take it forward to find some training. If anybody does have a specific training need, then please, if you'd like, if you don't share it with me, that's fine, but please share it with Jill, and then we can accommodate it on hopefully a training seminar day. But you raised a very good point, Anne. Anybody will be invited to any licensing training that is going on, regardless. The leader of the council who couldn't sit on licensing, but he could still come to the training. So if ever that situation changed, he would be available to sit on licensing. Thank you very much. Linda, you wanted to come in. Thank you. Linda?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, it's really just in response to Councillor Filer. The licensing committee for the Licensing Act, so for premises licensing, so licensing that comes under the Licensing Act 2003. It is very formal. There's got to be a formal committee between 11 and 15 members, and any subcommittee that deals with matters raised under the Licensing Act have got to be part of that committee. So in those situations, we can't have people outside of the 11 as a substitute. Obviously, for your full licensing committee, like you are today, that there's absolutely no problem, and obviously the more trained people are, the better it is. So it is specifically just matters that come under the Licensing Act 2003. So taxis, you can put substitutes in because there's no statutory bar to that. It's just finding a subcommittee. So I suppose what we've done generally, because items may get mixed in a subcommittee meeting, there may be a taxi matter, there may be a Licensing Act matter. We have generally just looked to substitutes from the formal 15. So it's just going forward if Democratic Services were finding it a problem to find members, but then we would just have to be a little bit careful with how we arrange the meetings and what gets put into each subcommittee. But as far as training is concerned, yeah, any training we do, we like to, I think Democratic Service lead it, and they ask us to invite every council member that who takes an interest. I think it's very helpful for as many ward members to have a bit of background in licensing, to help their residents. So yeah, encourage all your other colleagues to come along.
Thank you, Linda. Councillor Williams, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I can definitely reiterate what's just been said. It's been a long time since I sat on licensing, and listening to this morning and going through the papers, I realise I definitely need a refresher. It's not as easy as just turning up and getting involved. You really do need the training. Thank you.
Thank you, Lawrence. Yes, I'm mindful that we do have, although we have a lot of old hands, so to speak, like your good self, I'm mindful that we all need to be square and start training on an even keel. And of course, everybody's welcome. With regard to subcommittees, although I didn't touch on that, Linda, but thank you for bringing in that extra element. Obviously, you have to be a member of licensing in order to sit on a subcommittee, if that clarifies that for you, Anne, if that's simpler. But thank you, Linda, for your bringing in that extra element and advising us on that. So if we're happy then with that arrangement. And the last thing is Sarah Rogers still with us? Sarah, you're still there. Yeah. We had a bit of an anomaly because we had sort of a round robin where I know all members got emails from the taxi trade, putting in their responses and their submissions and asking us to do this, that and the other, etc., etc. And also one with an objection to a particular premises license has just came in, and I think that went to everybody. So I was concerned that we needed to adopt specific pathways so that we weren't getting lobbied, because obviously this for new members, and for old members I'm boring you, but with new members we have to be extremely careful the discussions we have with anybody with regard to any item that's coming forward with regard to advice, because of course if it were a matter for a subcommittee and we were sitting on that subcommittee, then we may have fettered our discretion by having that discussion. Of course, any ward member can advise any resident that comes to them with regard to policy, but one just has to be careful with regard to something which is more in depth. It might be a pub in your ward, and it may be that you are happy to give that person advice, but then you would obviously need to absent yourself because you had obviously fettered your discretion with regard to discussing that with the resident. It's very much a judgment call for each ward member. So that being said, we did have this, there was some breach, or not breach, the solicitor I think had written the advert himself, and we were bombarded. I don't want to be bombarded. I expect all these types of things to go directly to where they should, to the professionals, to the Democratic Services Officer, who will advise those people making submissions or objections in the correct way. So what I'm saying is, if you do get something, the best thing to do is, obviously I'll reply quickly to advise, but if you do get something and you're unsure about it, my advice would be not to answer the person who has asked you, but to ask our our clerk, Jill, to answer on your behalf and behalf of the committee, so that they do get the information they need. And as people write in, if this does start to be a habit, then we will be advising people that there is a pathway. And Sarah, I think, is going to tell us about that. Thank you, Sarah.
Yes, this was a total one-off, to be perfectly honest. The solicitor in the newspaper site notice, instead of putting our generic licensing email, licensing@bcpcouncil.gov.uk, he put the BCP Council website address. The objector went onto that website, obviously did their own research, came up with licensing, and just took it upon themselves to email all of the members of the licensing committee. I've spoken to the solicitors and asked them not to put our website address in their template. Again, just use our generic one. It's never happened before. I very much doubt it will happen again. It was the quick common sense, I think, of the person making the rep that resulted in that. So all of our guidance, the templates that we provide, all provide our licensing general email address, so it shouldn't happen again.
No, indeed, and nobody's fault there, Sarah. Obviously, solicitor thought he was doing his best, and I certainly wasn't criticising in any way, shape, or form. But I was grateful for it happening, because it does highlight members of the licensing committee being lobbied in the same way that I'm sure Councillor Kelsey will support me in this. My many days of planning and as vice chair, lobbying planning is just a no-no, and the advice obviously in planning is don't advise, don't say anything. And obviously if you want to advise, then please speak to Linda or somebody who can advise you as to what you can and can't say, because with my members, I don't want anybody's discretion fettered, because I need you all, because need you all to be there and to be able to be available for subcommittees. David, thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yeah, like you say, we get it all the time in planning, and the way I normally respond is just to say thank you very much for your email. I will read it and take all your comments into consideration when making, and that's it. Just leave it as simply one sentence and reply to them, and that's it.
That's very helpful, David, for a generic one-liner. Thank you very much for that. Thank you. Linda.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I mean, you certainly have had so many emails sent to all of the licensing committee. I've really known nothing sort of like it, but I'm hoping that things will calm once we get the taxi policy sorted. It seems the majority of the emails you have received have all been about the taxi draft policies that were out to consultation, and they were going to be discussed at today's meetings, which was the initial date. So I'm sort of hoping that that may die down after we've got the other side of proper taxi policies. As Sarah said, the premises license shouldn't be an act. I mean, all the information that goes to the people, they're told to make their responses, their representations, make any objections, any comments. They are given the right address. I think the taxi drivers have just contacted you directly when they really shouldn't. And the premises license application this week was probably just a one-off mistake. But I think it's quite right. It's not for you in your in that forum, just as a licensing committee, to make any response. And I think it's quite appropriate just to say to any email that you get, just for politeness, is this has been forwarded to the licensing team. It'll be considered as part of a representation, or your comments taken on board. I think less is more. It's, as you say, Councillor Butt has already advised all of you. You don't want to make any particular comment about any of it at any time, because you can take all those comments, and you will take all those comments when it's all just part of the representations presented towards, in front of you all when you're making your determination of whatever the application is at the time.
Thank you very much for that, Linda, and thank you, David, for your suggestion of the one-liner. That's excellent. I did actually write, I think, to all members about that particular point with the last objection that was put in with regard to premise, just asking if the clerk could advise. Thank you. So, members, thank you very much. I think unless there's anything specific that anybody wants to raise, I have nothing under urgent matters. So I will say thank you very much. Thank you very much to all the new members. Thank you for all your contributions, some good contributions there. Thank you for our substitute, Councillor File, extremely kind of you to jump in at such short notice. And I look forward to seeing you all again it'll be next year now, so wishing you all very happy Christmas, if not a bit early, and hopefully to put some training in place in the new year. So thank you very much, members and officers, and I will now draw the meeting to formal closure. Thank you and goodbye.